A few days ago, French President Emmanuel Macron visited Kenya. But a lot of people are asking, why is France suddenly so interested in Kenya and East Africa? France and Kenya don't really share much history. Kenya was never colonized by France. It's not a French-speaking country. It doesn't use the CFA franc like many former French colonies do. So why did Macron travel all the way to Nairobi, invite more than 30 African leaders, and hold what France called the Africa Forward Summit? The answer is simple. France is losing influence in Africa, and it's looking for new allies. For many years, France had strong control and influence in parts of West and Central Africa, especially in French-speaking countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, and Chad. France had military bases there. French companies controlled large parts of the economy, and many of those countries still use the CFA franc, a currency closely tied to France and the euro. But that influence is now falling apart. Over the last few years, several African countries have pushed France out. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger expelled French troops. Senegal also asked France to hand over its military bases, saying foreign bases no longer match the country's independence and sovereignty. Some of these countries are now building closer ties with Russia instead. So France needed a new strategy, and that's where Kenya comes in. Kenya is very different from France's traditional allies in Africa. It's English-speaking, making it a major shift from France's usual francophone network. In fact, this was France's first major Africa summit hosted in an English-speaking country. For France, partnering with Kenya is not just about Kenya alone. It's about securing influence in East Africa at a time when its influence in West Africa is weakening fast. Kenya sits in the perfect geographic position. It's the gateway to East Africa, a hub for trade, finance, and logistics that serves Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, and even parts of Ethiopia. Kenya remains one of East Africa's largest and most strategically positioned economies, serving as a major trade, logistics, and financial center for neighboring countries. If you control influence in Nairobi, you have a doorway into a regional economy of over 300 million people. So what exactly does France gain from all this? First, the Port of Mombasa. This is probably the biggest prize. French shipping giant CMA-CGM is investing around 700 million euros to help modernize the Port of Mombasa, and that matters because Mombasa is the biggest and most important port in East Africa. Whoever has influence over that port has influence over regional trade. Goods going into Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, Eastern Congo, and parts of Tanzania often pass through Mombasa. In today's world, ports are not just business assets, they are strategic geopolitical assets. So France, through one of its biggest companies, now has a strong foothold on one of Africa's most important coastlines. Second, the military angle. While most people focused on the business deals, France and Kenya also signed a defense cooperation agreement with some very interesting details. France already has around 600 military personnel in Kenya. Under the agreement, French soldiers operating in Kenya receive protections similar to diplomatic immunity. Disputes involving French troops are expected to go through diplomatic channels instead of Kenyan courts. In some cases, France also keeps primary legal control over offenses involving its personnel. That's significant. Third, energy deals. One of the agreements focuses on nuclear energy cooperation. Kenya has plans for a future nuclear power plant, and France is one of the world's biggest exporters of nuclear technology. That could mean decades of contracts for French engineering and energy companies. And it doesn't stop there. France is also positioning itself in wind energy, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, and Kenya's electricity grid modernization. In simple terms, Kenya gets infrastructure and expertise, while French companies get long-term business opportunities that could last for decades. Fourth, technology and digital infrastructure. Kenya wants to become Africa's Silicon Savannah, a major tech and innovation hub. France wants to be part of building that future. That includes fiber optic systems, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital infrastructure. And whoever helps build a country's digital backbone often gains long-term influence in that country's economy and institutions. Fifth, The market itself. France is already one of Kenya's biggest foreign investors. Around 150 French companies operate in Kenya across sectors like retail, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and logistics. Kenya has a young population, a growing middle class, and one of the fastest-growing economies in the region. For French businesses, that's a massive opportunity. And finally, image and influence. This part is easy to miss, but it may actually matter the most. France needed to prove that it still matters in Africa. After being pushed out of several West African countries, Paris needed a new success story. Kenya gives France that opportunity. At the same time, global powers are competing heavily for influence in Africa. China is financing infrastructure. Gulf states are investing in ports and agriculture. Turkey is expanding defense ties. Russia has increased its presence in parts of the Sahel. So this summit was not just about Kenya. It was also France telling the world, we are still a major player in Africa. On paper, it looks like Kenya has struck gold, but many Kenyans are still asking one important question, and they're asking it loudly on social media, in political debates, and even in the streets. Will ordinary citizens actually benefit from all this money and investment? Or will it disappear into the same system that has swallowed so many big projects and megadeals before? Now let's talk about the biggest concern many people have, who actually benefits from these deals. First, look at the man at the center of it all, President William Ruto. Since taking office, his administration has faced constant accusations of corruption, lack of transparency, and controversial government spending. So naturally, many Kenyans are asking whether these new partnerships will truly help the public, or mainly benefit a small group of powerful people. The clearest winners are probably the French multinational companies. They gain long-term contracts, access to a growing market, and influence over major Kenyan infrastructure like ports, energy systems, and technology networks. In many ways, they walk away with the biggest share of the opportunity. Then there's the Kenyan political and business elite. People close to power, politically connected businessmen, contractors, governors, and MPs are likely to position themselves around these projects through tenders, subcontracting deals, and behind-the-scenes facilitation. For many Kenyans, this is the part that feels familiar. Large government projects in Kenya have often created wealth for a small circle long before ordinary citizens see any real benefit. Now, to be fair, some ordinary Kenyans could still gain something. Construction workers may get jobs building railways, roads, or port facilities. Students could benefit from new universities and science programs. Commuters might eventually use better transport systems. Farmers and exporters may access new international markets. Those benefits are real, but they usually take years to reach people, and even then, they're often unevenly distributed. The biggest risk falls on taxpayers. Many of these projects are partly financed through loans or long-term financial agreements, and Kenya is already dealing with a massive public debt burden running into trillions of shillings. So if these projects fail to generate enough economic value, ordinary Kenyans could end up paying for them through higher taxes, rising living costs, and debt repayments for decades to come.